Yeah, excellent. I'm looking forward to it to a lot. Have some good notes and slides, and we'll see how far I get. But great stuff for today. Thanks, John. I keep doing these on Tuesdays. I'm going to be skipping next Tuesday, so you'll be able to network at least. It's great to have you on live. As I said, Daniel, an astounding amount of views on the replay for this as well for last week. So that's great. So I think this is hitting a lot of enthusiasm from you guys, which is super, putting a lot into it and looking to have this be a summary and capstone series to a lot of application. After that, I'm not going to disappear at all, but I will be taking some time and then take this more widely, but with probably less of a focus on making money and stuff. With you guys, you get the more targeted toward making money. Hey, Rohit, 4:30 a.m. Wow. Which place? Rohit? I know, Mike is crazy. Mike told me watch it like each day for five days approximately. And that was encouraging for that last week. All right. I will get started with the slides in a second. Curious where Rohit is, but if you know, I can see once I come back. Mumbai, excellent. Is Rohit the right pronunciation, or is it different? Immersion, absolutely. Dave says they added a new client using LOI strategy. Good. Larger e-com site, 100 million in sales. They want me to do net 30 as me as a vendor. I help them understand how I'm actually a consultant. They never find out like me, doubles my income after initial site audit. They never blink twice, about 4K a month. Congrats, Dave. That's wonderful news. Rohit, great. And a stress on both syllables, great. So yeah, and great news from Michelle, right? Estrada in the NHP team group and getting yet another client and exciting. It's always nice to see progression where first someone hits a no with something and wants some support. And then a few days later, they find another client. And so part of what we'll talk about today and consistently, right? One part of law of application is that it'll increase both your real confidence and of course, then the confidence that you project in a sustainable and growing way, where it's not like normally the way people do confidence. It's you're taking one step forward, one step back or worse, right? Where you're implying a lack of confidence and I'll stand on that. Pretty much immediately, I'll be talking about things related to that. Oh, let's get to some slides here. All right. So I have the cause and effect slide still 2 slides down, but it all relates, right? Ultimately, we want something that I'm trying to tie things together in a way that's profound and where there's a number of concepts that fit together into sort of one ultimate, idea. And so the law of implication, there's 2 ways that I express it, both of which need more explanation and can be misinterpreted. The other way, besides what's on this slide, is the idea of focus on what you know, right? Which can also be stated as focus on increasing your understanding or clarity or distinctions. And in that way of stating the law of implication about in terms of increasing understanding and clarity, focusing on what you know and building from there, what that does is it always gives you, in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way of saying it, it always gives you like a second best way of what to do with at any moment or with anything. The best thing would be to know the best thing, right? To know if you want to rank a website, the best would be to know the next action to take to most efficiently do that. The good thing about the law of implication is it gives you a backstop to, obviously, if we always knew exactly the right thing to do in life, then we wouldn't need any kind of additional thoughts, right? We would just be all knowing and do whatever we needed to do at every moment. Our dilemma is constantly when we don't know exactly what to get what we want or even exactly what we want in the first place. And then realizing to go for clarity and realizing that we can't be stopped by doing that it's like a plan A that's always going to work. And then any kind of sub plan, taking action, taking direct action, trying to go straight for what you want, trying to be a little clever about what you want, whatever it might be, it's all going to lead to more clarity, right? So that's the kind of beautiful and profound nature of one way of stating the law of application is that understanding line and how seeking understanding gives you a way to proceed in a way that's going to always be helpful, always correct. And it's second best really only to already knowing, what to do. And of course that comes out plenty. So once you always have that backstop, which is a very practical and actionable backstop, then you're in incredible shape in life. So just realizing that's huge. Then the next thing you do with that is you turn it on itself and you say, all right, I'm not exactly sure what to do about clarity or what exactly it means or understanding. And so the next thing you do is try to get understanding about understanding, right? And once you do that, then you're on an upward spiral. in life, period. And so what I just said there, in one sense, a full explanation of the law of implication. There's still lots of thinking and discovering to do after that, which I've been doing for a couple decades at this point or more. And so the other stuff I talk about, but it doesn't change that basic. Now on this slide, I'm going to be talking about the other way to state the law of implication. They're both true and correct, and they're both angles on the same thing also. And it's going to relate to power. It's going to relate to cause and effect, all of it. And if we go back even just for a second to what I just said about clarity and increasing clarity, then, or how do I say this? To be happy and to be successful or to accomplish any particular goal or to break through with the particular thing we're working on right now, then in one way of looking at it in a kind of profound way, then if we increase our power, either specifically for that particular breakthrough or goal or target or overall, then we're good, right? That again gives us like a backstop. If we know that we want to increase our power, when we understand the clarity angle, then we can realize right away that clarity about power is going to get us where we want to go, better, faster, or at all, rather than failing and so forth, potentially. Right. So we want clarity about clarity, and then we want clarity about power. And those are very central concepts, right, to the core question or idea of being happy, successful on a day-to-day, on an ultimate level, and so forth, right? Everything you're doing all the time, that is the most practical thing, right? That everything you're doing all the time involves some sort of success, either narrow kind of success or a greater overall kind of meta success. But some people say it depends how you define success. And what I'm talking about, it does not depend on how you define success, really, or that statement is irrelevant, right? Success, or at least, or once you define it as success, is what you are going for, whatever it might be. And ultimately, success obviously involves being happy on a reliable, continuous basis. And even more ultimately than that, other people as well being happy, right? Because you're going to be happier if other people are happier, unless you're deceived, right? And then, of course, being deceived limits your happiness. All right. So once we get to where power is one of the central concepts, and we don't need to define power, we need to gain clarity. Defining it in the traditional way is what I talked about last time. It's like projecting clarity, imposing clarity incorrectly. If I were to just to say power is such and such, and I just give you a sentence, right? Instead, we want to gain distinctions about power and understand it better, get more clarity, not pretend that we can just impose clarity on it in the false way by projecting or defining. Right. There's a time and a place when defining your terms might be relevant. And I alluded to that, or the meta idea of that as well last time, where if the outer context, the outer foundational frames and so forth isn't really going to trip you up, right? Which happens a lot in normal conversation and so forth, where the kind of shared assumptions and even defective assumptions about the world don't matter that much. Just like if you're playing a video game or watching a movie, the fact that you're actually watching a movie, playing a game, it might be very important if the building's on fire or all kinds of other reasons. But when the movie ends or you die in a game, or if it's time to do something different in real life that's important, then it matters to realize you're playing a game. However, while you are playing a game and while there isn't anything else important going on in your other life besides inside the game, then you don't even need to realize you're playing a game, right? You can just be immersed within the game. So that's another example of where the outer frames don't matter if they don't happen to matter, right? Being totally blind to outer frames is always going to kick you in the butt at some point, right? So having no idea that you're playing, getting so immersed that you can't get out of it when necessary is like a ticking time bomb, right? Similarly, all kinds of incorrect meta assumptions about life or deeper assumptions about life and how it works and how perception works and power and love and faith and success and happiness and thinking and the mind, who we are. All of those things, people have an incorrect worldview and incorrect outer frames about those things and context. And then they get kicked in the butt by them or screwed up or tripped up by those often. But they often as well don't, and they can do things competently. And the reason is, just like with a game, and I talked about this last time, but just a quick review, whenever the outer frames happen to not matter practically, then you're fine. You're fine without realizing what the greater frames are. If the problems don't matter, they don't matter, right? If the discrepancies, if the incorrect assumptions don't matter, then it doesn't. If someone has all kinds of beliefs about politics, then if they're doing an activity with you where all of those incorrect beliefs or assumptions don't impact the test or the experience you're having with the person that doesn't, right? Then it doesn't matter until it does, right? Until something goes on where the problems impact. Okay. So power. All right. The law of attraction is correct. And I say here, but it's typically missing a greater frame of people's understanding. I'm not accusing any particular student or guru of being wrong or missing the frame, but as a practical matter, no question that people are typically missing the greater frame. And in missing it, then just like I talked about just now, whenever that missing frame is going to be a problem, it's going to be a problem. Sometimes a simplistic frame lacking understanding of the law of attraction is enough, right? Just like what I've said, just like sometimes playing a game and forgetting that you're playing a game and getting really immersed in it is totally fine and appropriate. But there's all sorts of times with the law of attraction where missing the greater frame is going to prevent it from being very helpful for you and block it and so forth. With the law of implication, you're going to have the law of attraction unleashed. Now, why do we need the law of attraction? And I'll answer that question while also indicating, just summarizing what I mean by the law of attraction. Part of it, I talk about cause and effect coming up either in this webinar or another webinar. But let me give a quick indication with cause and effect just to fit this in with everything I'm saying. All of the problems with cause and effect come from having a view that's more narrow than from overly simplistic about what causes effects. And when we think about cause and effect, it's a similar question to power. People are assuming that they understand or that their assumptions are right about cause and effect all the time, because everything you do, no matter how mundane or how grand a scale, every moment, every hour, every day, every week, every year, you're constantly using your paradigm about cause and effect because you're constantly trying to get effect. Right? Think about it, right? Every action you take, every thought you have can be reframed with the rephrase to be, I want to figure out, or I think that I know that this cause, I'm using cause, these words casually right now. Don't worry about like specific law of implication definitions of these things and nuance I've talked about in the past. I'll circle around back to that. But for now, that doesn't matter. And it will matter, but it doesn't for the moment. So don't get wrapped up in nuances of what I mean by cause and effect. Just use a simple, normal, common, somewhat blurry, but useful for our circumstances right now. So I'm pointing out now that your thoughts, your actions can constantly be phrased as, if I do this, it'll cause the following effect, right? Or I want the following effect. I want this person to say yes to me as a client. I want this person to like me for the next few minutes. Like I want the conversation, whatever conversation I'm having, to go where a person likes me. I want to find some form of entertainment that's going to have the effect of making me happy, right? I want to figure out what to do to get some appointment, right, with prospects, or get prospects to my website, or do whatever, right? Whatever you might be doing in life can always be framed in terms of cause and effect. Therefore, clarity on cause and effects is going to be massive, right? Because every time, and it's going to be massive if there are problems in your paradigm for cause and effect. Now, to the extent that you've been following me, then we've talked about it a decent amount, and you probably have a much better understanding of cause and effect than typically people do. However, in this capstone series, I want to really cement it. And I'm quite certain that, well, we can have additional clarity there. But typically, people have a very mistaken view of cause and effect. It has a whole number of problems with it, but they boil down to the following. Might as well pop on the slides, summarize this slide fairly quickly here and then go back. Essentially, all right, I've said in the past, and I'll quickly say again, and we don't want to get bogged down at the moment. Reality takes place in your consciousness field, in that which you're aware of. We have a construct about reality, which is good until it's no longer good, like with anything, like I've talked about. We have a construct that's an approximation that is incorrect, but useful when it's useful, which is plenty, which is how you normally view the world. Sorry, like how everyone thinks of the world, where there's material objects in it, and knowledge is based in tangible experiences in the real world and all that. And we're a person who's a body and a mind and has the emergent property of being conscious. Maybe machines can become conscious, all of those kind of ideas. But just again, I'm unintentionally being brief, which means I'll leave various nuances out for the moment about this. So in real reality, all takes place as consciousness field, as that which individual beings are aware. Then we can distinguish between causes and reasons in a way that we can't in the normal worldview. A cause and a reason kind of blend together. There's not really much of a distinction between the two in practice or in usage, or even if we tried to tease them apart with philosophy, we'd run into problems, as philosophy does in a million different angles with the normal kind of incorrect, naive, realistic worldview of the physical world being foundation for reality and experience and perception, which it's not. And it's not an opinion. What I'm saying is definitely correct. Fine if it's not clear or if it's confusing at all right now. I'm just giving an overview. Okay, given that our conscious field is where everything is rooted and where reality takes place, then we can distinguish between causes and reasons. And today I'm really talking about reasons, not causes, because cause is just one thing. The cause of your consciousness field being configured the way it existing in the first place and being configured the way it is God is, or more specifically, a being, which turns out to have to be one being, not multiple ones, with the ability to both make and change, right, your consciousness field. That's the cause of your consciousness field, and that's the cause of why it is right now. However, God follows reason why your consciousness field is a certain way. It's not arbitrary. It's not just ever to hurt you. It's always actually to have the best for you. You've heard me say many times, the reason God does things with regularity is creates a whole set of reasons that allow for us to have free will, which allows for more good than if we did not have free will. Once God does that, he opens up a whole ball of wax with a world where we can have problems and so forth. We need to have at least the potential for problems and bad in order to have free will. Don't have to have them actually exist, but we need, I don't believe, as far as I can tell. But so we're thinking about reasons now. That nuance about conscious field and God causing and reasons is not going to matter all that much for a while, which is helpful because I can talk in a simplified, kind of profound way where that's not going to be critical. But it's somewhat relevant for the background. And also for people that have been following me, I wanted to put that in the background and not contradict that terminology too hard. All right. So now with what's on this slide, the mistakes about cause and effect have to do with a simplistic notion of, I wrote cause and effect, and again, commonly using common speak, causes and reasons boil down to the same. So if I accidentally use them interchangeably for this webinar, just don't get bogged down in it. But I could have put reasons and effect. The reasons why you have a particular result, why a client says yes or says no, why a website ranks, why you wake up feeling energized, or to the extent that you're energized and to the extent that you're not as energized as you could be, or whether you're in a good mood and specifically why you're in the mood that you're in, which might be somewhat good, somewhat bad, whatever, somewhat pensive, whatever. If you feel angry, right? The constant mistake or the constant symptom of the deeper mistake, it has to do with an overly simplified sense of what the reason is, why you feel a certain way, why a client said yes or no, or why anyone did anything, including yourself. Why you're motivated. You might say my lack of motivation is a problem, or procrastination is my problem, or I'm not using enough willpower, right? All those are examples of assigning reason as if there's one reason. And sometimes people will, so associated ground is like a word that Mike uses, like in a fight, if there's like a guy who like looks like he's the one that beat everyone up, or in a basketball game, right? There's a guy that scores the most baskets, right? And he looks like the MVP, and he might be, but it might also be people that weren't so obvious, right? In terms of the most direct connection to scoring might have not been from them, but they might have had a lot of impact, or at least a significant impact. Or if you have a quarterback, then his defensive line doesn't get a lot of the glory because the immediate association is you see the quarterback throw the ball, someone catches it and they score a touchdown and so forth. And the camera's kind of focused on the quarterback and so forth. So we tend to assign them a disproportionate amount of causality or a reason why there was a win or a loss. And that sort of phenomenon is going on all the time. So the first mistake with cause and effect has to do with overly assigning the thing that is front and center. And our mind has an actual algorithm to do that, right? Our mind is wired with a default way to survive with an algorithm that is relatively good at that. And algorithms are inherently limited, just like a computer AI is inherently limited in a certain way. And so, as I said before, it's not that your algorithm is designed in a flawed or wrong way necessarily. It's just that there's only so much you can do with an algorithm, and the priority is survival. And you have to approximate certain things. You have to like program certain things in advance, and you're lacking the context, right? If you're God and you're programming a human when they're born with certain instincts, and you're programming their brain with certain general algorithms, then you're not programming in the exact circumstance that they're going to run into when they're 35 and a half, right? It's May 31st at 7. So that's what I mean by the algorithm is inherently limited. That can't take all those details into account. So it's generalized. So the best generalization, the thing that's going to work most often, if you have to pick something, which our mind does, again, as a general algorithm, is to assign as a reason the thing that looks new and different and stands out. It's more front and center in the environment as the thing to pay most attention to. And it's the reason for the issue, right? If there's a bunch of deer running and there's clearly like one big lion jumping after them, then you say they're running because of the lion. But it's the big obvious cause. That is useful, just like with what am I going to say? That works until it doesn't work, right? Whenever it happens to be that the practical effect of assuming that's the reason is useful, right? The decision you make or the recipe you follow, whatever. If you say the reason that I made the sale is because I was enthusiastic and confident, or because I had this questionnaire. And if for all practical purposes, when you repeat things that way, it works again, right? Then it was fine to do that. If you have to pick one thing, then picking the glory hound is reasonable, right? If I have to pick a guy to choose for my team on basketball, I probably would pick the guy that scored the most points in the previous game, right? That's reasonable. Of course, if I had more nuances, I might make an even more informed decision. But again, if that's all I had to go on, and all I can see is the points, I'll pick the guy with the most points. Okay. Then sometimes people say, no, it wasn't just one thing, it was these three things. Step 1, 2, and 3, the recipe. That's ultimately a mistake as well. And then people will make mistake number 3 with cause and effect, where they'll end up saying, no, really, it's not that you had this recipe or even it's not that you had this questionnaire to go over with a potential client. That's not why you closed them. The reason you closed them was your mindset, or that you showed mindfulness, right? Or that you are confident or whatever. Tony Robbins would say being in a peak state. Now, I don't mean to overly simplify. He says more than that, but he might say that being in a peak state is going to cause you to have a lot more success, right? Or be the main cause, right? Some number of people say that this has to do with mindset. He'll also say, get a recipe from the person who's most successful, emulate what they do, which is actually completely correct advice, but pretty much anywhere you look, it's missing a larger frame. Perfectly reasonable to do that, but you do it in order to see where the bottlenecks are when you try to do that, or you just succeed, right? But even if you succeed, you still want to break it down ultimately and gain clarity from that success. As a practical matter, when it comes to sales and conversion, copying something else that works a lot less frequently than people suppose. However, it's a perfectly reasonable starting point. It's also perfectly reasonable I actually on purpose don't start there, not with conversion. But if I was ranking a website, I'd certainly go and ask someone what works and just do that. If I knew very little about conversion or sales, then I would certainly copy a template to start out with and see where that got me and see what I can learn. So that's it. But ultimately, it's still a mistake because the correct understanding of cause and effect is ultimately the thing about reasons I said. But then to understand that once we get the distinction about reasons versus what God does, which practically speaking doesn't matter in a lot of cases, including for most of a lot of what you're going to be doing, it's not going to matter too hard. So we'll just think about reasons now for a second. And I talked about this in dimensionality and in my frame series in a certain way, is really the reasons why a client says yes rather than no, or why a business succeeds or fails. Is you could say a series of factors, but it's really a succession of frames, right? There's the reason I don't say that I teach mindset. It's more, if anything, I would say I teach like frames or something like that, or just law of application. Mindset is only one of the several frames. There's frames in the environment, there's frames in the other person's mind, and a whole lot of these are out of your control. In a lot of cases, they're out of your control, but having clarity about them will put them in a certain way under your control, and that often the more clarity you have, the more you can lead to a kind of an overall frame being created that works very well with all the stuff you can't control. For example, you're working with one or more partners, the better you understand them, not just their strengths and weaknesses, but what how they're going to tend to act in all frame it in a bunch of ways in terms of where they're going to do what they say and in what circumstances they're going to do what they say and what's going to be easy for them, what's going to take them longer than they suppose, what they're going to be able to deliver pretty consistently, all that. You can't necessarily control that directly or change it directly. But the more you understand that about partners you're working with, the more, even if you're not in charge, the more you can work with that. And you don't have to be in charge to ultimately be the one that makes sure the rest of the frame is in place. That's going to cause it. In a sense, that's what you end up being in charge in that way, but without overtly taking charge in your mind or their mind or whatever. It can be faster if you actually are in charge and they act like it, and you do that. But only if you're right. Being in charge of being wrong is very inefficient. All right. So cause and effect is going, again, I'm looking to do actually a relatively brief summary of this and get back to my original slide. But I think the summary will be useful as context, and I'll refer back to it. It'll start to build on itself and refer back and forth. So there's a succession of frames. It's not just mindset. There's assumptions that can go deeper than mindset, like this whole paradigms or beliefs about the world or understanding of clarity, cause and effect, law of implication, power. That is in my way of speaking, deeper than mindset, right? If you have an accurate understanding of cause and effect, I don't call that a mindset, right? It's more like a foundational or nearly foundational frame, right? Or one of the frames within the overall foundational framework. It doesn't really matter the exact words you use, right? But that idea is getting the relevant outer frames is part of cause and effect, right? It's just a succession of frames plus what's going on in the environment. Whether, again, a potential client says yes is based on a whole bunch of factors, like whether they recently made a purchase that they're satisfied with or that they're unsatisfied with, whether they're satisfied in a way that they want to buy more of that same thing, or whether they're satisfied in a way that they don't really want to necessarily buy something else in that same vein for now, right? Where they feel like they have extra money or they're tight on money. Whether they feel powerful today in the sense that they feel like taking risks is going to go in their favor, right? And then there's a whole bunch of their perceptions about you. Are you competent? Do you come across as confident? Do you have related to that, do you have a plan both in that they can feel of what's going to happen after they say yes? Do you have clarity? Is that coming across? Is it translating into a representation in their mind, a visualization, a representation of what's going to happen? If that representation of what's going to happen after they say yes and give you a check is vague, then that's going to impede their decision making, right? That's one of the many frames that's involved. And frames can influence frames, right? If you're confident, that can influence where they end up and so forth. But mastering that conversion process means having more and more distinctions about the potential frames that are going to matter, right? If you're aware of, let's say, 12 different types of frames that need to get clicked into your favor, like in a combination lock. Now, in real life, it's not exactly like a combination lock. It's a little bit more threshold. Combination lock is a threshold in a sense, but you don't necessarily have to get every tumbler in place. You need to get enough frames in your favor to get over the high jump, right? To get over the threshold. Always keep that in mind. To try to consistently not make the mistake of thinking that you have to get everything right, everything in your favor, everything perfect. Again, you have to do what it takes to win in order to win, which might not be perfect, might not be everything. Or it might be twice as much as you would otherwise do, right? You might have far to go in order to get over a threshold. And then you are perfect in getting over the threshold, right? If you win, you're winning perfectly. You're just not doing extra stuff, right? If we define perfection as doing what it takes to actually win in reality, then winning is perfect and it's merely inefficient to have done stuff that might otherwise be called perfect, but isn't relevant for your win. You don't always know that in advance. So as a practical strategic matter, you're going to generally plan to get over the high jump, right? Get over the threshold with a buffer, right? If you're trying to jump over a bar and you need to get over it, you don't try to cut it to a millimeter, right? You also don't need to get 10 feet over, right? But whatever buffer is a practical amount that is going to make it very likely that you'll get over, then that's where you're going. All right. So the results in your life are caused by a succession of frames. There's deeper understandings of meta concepts like mind, well, the things we're talking about, mind, power, clarity, and cell, things like we talk about in law of implication. Then there's what we might think of mindset, which you might think of as a level below something, or however, but it's part of the recipe. That remember, you don't need to hit every aspect of a recipe in order to win, like I just said. So keep in mind, but it's easy to forget that. It's easy to think, okay, so I need this. Not necessarily. In practice, what you normally do, what'll often happen, I think my kind of go-to way of doing things is I try to just accomplish whatever goal reveals itself, whatever target I want to hit. I just try to hit it, right? If I think it now, here's what I really do. I'll think it through. I'll think through what I would do to hit it. And sometimes it's pretty obvious that you really don't know what to do. And just going it and doing it is really not going to be a high percentage play. In that case, I'll go work on my planning and preparation and learning and theory and ask people and whatever that might be. At the point when it might work and it's not going to really bite me in the butt if I go for it and fail, then I'll just go for it. If I spot that's all, like the path is reasonably clear for me to give it a try, go out and try to ask somebody to have a meeting with me or something like that about a sale or to be an affiliate or whatever, and I'm still not doing it, whatever it might be, then you might look for where's the resistance in your own mind? Why are you making excuses? That's constantly going to be a lack of clarity about some form of lack of clarity that you're going to jump into. What's going to cause you to have a lack of motivation or kind of resistance to something or feel like you're sabotaging yourself a certain way in the sense of not moving forward when the way seems like it should be clear, then something's not clear that you need to get clear. And look at your fulfillment. Look and see if you really know what you're going to do once the person says yes. So if you look at it, you're really not sure what you're going to do. If you get a meeting with someone, like at a coffee shop to talk with them about becoming a client, if it's vague and you're going to feel a bit of a sense of panic, crap, now I got to figure out what to say. You're going to be scared going into that meeting, then you're probably going to not do the thing before it, right? It's going to look like the reason is you're afraid of making a meeting when in fact you're not. You're afraid of the fulfillment of what happens if someone says yes. It's actually more likely that you're afraid of a yes than afraid of a no, in a sense, right? Does that make sense? Because then you're going to be doing something and you're not quite sure what you're actually going to do. You might be telling yourself, oh, great, that'll be wonderful news and I'll handle it. I'll just figure it out. That's fine if it's working for you. But if you're not taking action when you think that you should, the problem isn't that you're watching too many webinars. The problem is probably, right? Some people, again, might assign that as the reason. Remember, the bottleneck is one thing. The bottleneck is like the frame that's missing that's going to have the most impact if you get it right. So when I say that result you get or cause and effect involves a whole number of frames, then you're trying to know or guess or eyeball the best of your ability the frame that you can intervene at where that's going to open up the bottom, right? It's going to have the most impact. So as a practical matter, look at if anyone's in that stage where they think that they should be taking action and they're not. Forget about the cliche stuff about, oh, maybe I'm over learning or I'm getting analysis paralysis. It's almost certainly that you just don't have clarity on what's going to come next. And then the thing that comes after fulfilling a meeting, like fulfilling a sales meeting, is of course fulfilling the SEO or digital marketing itself. And so you want to have more clarity on that. And I usually, in practice, I tend to work backwards, inside out or whatever, where I first make sure that I have the final fulfillment. I have enough clarity where it's not worrying me in practice. I'm not talking about telling myself that I'm worried, but is it causing me to feel hesitation? Then I get more clarity on it. So The thing that I would do if I was going to do SEO consulting I would be ranking websites for sure. That would be my go-to action if I overall wasn't sure, because that's the final part of the fulfillment right after they say yes twice. Then I'll get clarity on my sales presentation. And clarity on sales presentation is easier once I know exactly what I'm actually going to do after they say it. Because a lot of your presentation can be creating a vision, right? Sales is first and foremost about vision. And what's the vision going to be after they say yeah, and whatever that might mean in your circumstance. So how do you create a vision in someone else? Ideally, you want to get clarity for yourself, and it should be attractive, right? You want to figure out what you're going to do. And you're also going to want to look at it from their end and think what about what you're going to do is going to be exciting for them. And you paint a picture, right? Describe. Okay. So cause and effect, talking about succession of frames, talking about how there's like the foundational frames or stuff like mindset, which manifests itself in things like being confident and focused and so forth. Then there's environmental factors. I was giving you examples of all the different frames that can be at play. Okay. So that gives you that all of what I just said, everything starting from when I clicked over to the cause and effect slide helped to fill in what I was building clarity and understanding for you, or distinctions. The clarity doesn't mean everything fits together. That's the feeling of understanding that you get by default. You can, instead of having that be your target, if you have as your target making distinctions, it's all going to add up to truly understanding something instead of that feeling like it fits. The feeling like it fits has a couple of problems, which I'll basically get to at some point. Okay. So why is the law of attraction important? There's the idea of it's missing a greater frame, but there's also, why am I referring to it in the first place? Why is it so important to get the law of attraction right, to frame it, to get the greater frame? If you have a partner, if they have a lot of potential, they have a strong talent that can be really harnessed, whatever, then getting the greater frame around them becomes important too. If the person has not much potential, at least regarding you and your projects that you're doing, then figuring out a way to create an environment or to do the rest of the project so it harnesses their great talent is not very important because they don't have one that's relevant for the project. The law of attraction is really stupid, really has terrific potential, which is why getting it inside the frame that's really going to harness its potential is important. So why is that? In one sense, cause and effect is related. There's a succession of frames. In another sense, when it comes to our power, and this relates to a central idea that not a cornerstone of the foundation of the law of application. Foundations are the sentence here about law of attraction is correct, but the missing frame. And the other is about just the understanding line or increasing clarity. But then there's a series of truths that are one or two steps removed from the center, but that they're very important for understanding things about how the mind works and stuff. And so one of them is you're not your mind, right? Is very close to the center as a critical concept. There's a few different angles to get to the same truth, but the truth itself is that in one sense, we need to simplify things in order to be effective. Life is too complicated to consciously get caught up in all the details. Whatever our conscious power is, it's going to need to be something simple. Whatever the outer frame is, there's a certain simplicity to it. Ultimately, there's a whole bunch of details that can fit inside of it. Our brain is actually good at dealing with a whole bunch of complicated details, but it's not good with the outer. So we need to supply the outer frame, which is outside of our brain's capacity, but it's simple in a certain way. Complicated things are actually often inside of our brain's capacity because there's one kind of continuum or line about complexity. Sorry, there's one sort of thing that your brain is good at. Sorry, I'm running into an issue explaining this, obviously. So within its own realm, your brain handles complexity way better. It's basically completely outside of your ability as a conscious being to handle any sort of complexity. Anything past a few bits of information, a few or several or whatever, some relatively small number of bits of information is totally outside of your capacity, as far as I can tell. But your brain is awesome. So the interplay between you and your brain is really close to the center of understanding how life works, therefore power, cause and effect, power, how clarity works, and therefore being happy and getting the results you want. In practice, getting that wrong is going to cause you all sorts of practical mistakes day by day. People don't guess that or realize that normally, so they don't feel the truth of that in the way that they seek it. But it's a practical consequence nonstop. And plenty of times when I tell you this deep idea is often not a practical consequence, but in this case, it is. In a day-to-day, constant, mundane level, the distinction between you and your mind and the related things I'm talking about right now and relating it to the law of attraction stuff is of great practical consequence. And harnessing your mind and framing it to then do what it's good at regarding the complexity and the massive amount of information that we encounter every second, visually, auditorily, relating that to our memories and associations and framework about the world in a practical way. There's so much information to process at every moment for your brain. And your brain is really good at it, but it's terrible at getting the outer frame right. And then when it doesn't get the outer frame right, then the next layer is screwed up. And so your brain is really good at something, but it's operating in a succession of deeper assumptions that are screwed up. And that ends up mattering a lot nonstop in terms of practically achieving your goals and enjoying the process and being happy. It doesn't affect people's ability to hit certain targets. Like people are constantly setting and achieving goals. They're constantly not, but they constantly are. It's certainly common for people to hit targets and do what they hope to do. And so, right. Yeah, happens plenty that people don't, but happens plenty that they do. But what? Somewhere between 25 and 50 or 25 to 75% of the time, people are not hitting their goals. So that matters and that adds up. And then also, as they hit them, not enjoying it, which just creates the whole nonstop situation in their lives where they're not really actually very happy. So we really want to get clear about how this interplay works and therefore how to harness and set things up and frame things so that our brain does what it does well. And we embrace and appreciate that and set it up well, like working with a partner, right? Like a joint venture partner in business. And we want to appreciate what we do consciously. And whatever we do consciously, the reality is it has to be simple. It has to be simple consciously. It's impossible for our brain to do. It's super easy for us to do if we get it. But if we don't realize it somewhere, and when I say we there, at this point, I'm going back to, don't worry about if it's your brain realizing it you, but the sum total of your brain and you and your thinking. If you don't realize the root of your power, and if you don't realize how to simplify things overall in life, you're screwed because you're unable to contribute consciously to what's going on, except in a way that's quite trivial. All right. The law of attraction is so great because it's profound, which means simple and like true and effective. And the answer again has to be simple because we don't process information as a conscious being. Our mind does that. So something complex can't be the answer. We need to boil things down to something simple. So what I'm going to be saying here is very empowering. And I've said similar things in the past, but again, as part of the capstone, I want to really hit this properly and hard. So the law of attraction is the idea that kind of like attracts like, or that our thoughts are things and we attract into our life that which we think about, particularly want, whatever our repetitive thoughts are, our beliefs and so forth, right? There's different manifestations of how people talk about the law of attraction, but it relates to this idea that our thoughts, that we attract what we focus on, right? Or that what we think about. The thoughts, again, are like things that serve as magnets and for the environment, and they kind of draw into our environment that which we think about. And also like how we act, like the level of our integrity is going to attract people both acting with integrity towards us and people out of more integrity. That if we do good, we're going to attract more good into our life, right? That sort of thing. If we do bad, then we attract more bad. If we're negative, then we attract more negative stuff into us. If we're more positive and more positive. If we think about becoming rich and believe we'll have money and have a vision board and so forth, then the idea is that we'll attract money. But so the law of attraction is correct, except that it's missing a greater frame, which means that if someone gets the greater frame wrong, which they typically do, then it's going to screw up the law of attraction and how it works for them and what they attract. So then the next sentence that's been on here for a while, the slide, what's going on with this greater frame is we don't attract the surface intent of our thought. And I'll illustrate this with confidence. It'll be pretty poignant with that. We don't attract the surface intent of our thoughts. We attract the implications of it. So we don't just attract money because we picture being rich and we put a bunch of Lamborghinis on our pictures around our room. Now, results come from a succession of frames, and having a frame of thinking about money and becoming wealthy can help in terms of us feeling motivated and focusing and prioritizing money. So that frame can help, right? But results really come from a succession of frames overall, not just one frame or not just a mindset of wanting money. And so we can create a sort of magnet for ourselves to make money by putting a bunch of pictures of expensive cars around or whatever moves us, like pictures of vacations or pictures of a retirement account being full, claiming it. That can set up a magnet which can attract, that can pull on that part of reality, pull on you making more money. But the results you get in life are the results of the sum total of magnets. And really, magnets tend to flow from your greater frame. The greater frame has a strong impact on more subframes, more surface stuff. Or like your mindset is impacted by your deeper beliefs about how the world works and who you are and so forth. So there's a succession of magnets. And the magnets from your greater frames, however, I'll say it this way and then I'll try to say it a different way. But like the greater frames act as magnet on the subframes themselves. And then the subframes themselves attract whatever the frame is about, whatever the frame really implies. So if you get the outer frames right, then you'll basically gradually attract everything else because you'll attract better subframes, and those better subframes will then attract other subframes, and then you'll get to the details, right? You'll get to the results that you want on kind of a surface level. And it doesn't work in reverse. Putting a bunch of pictures of Lamborghinis on your vision board or whatever isn't going to correct your deepest paradigms about life, like your deepest assumptions about who you are and how to know what's true, what's important about knowing what's true and the law of implication itself and all that we should seek clarity and so forth. Instead, the default thinking about the wrong way of going about clarity, the wrong fork in the road, where people by default, their mind imposes clarity on them, like the way the blind spot is filled in, right? That's imposed on your visual screen, right? The way the blind spot is filled in. And you're not going to realize you have a blind spot just by putting pictures of cars on your vision. You see what I'm saying? Or whatever it might be. Taking action, whatever it might be, standing in a way where you feel more confident, going and talking to someone who's successful in a particular area and getting the recipe of what they do. None of that is going to help you get your greater frames right if you're talking to people that have them wrong as well. And because we know a few of what the greater, most outer frames are, just by me talking about them in location or someone can figure them out. But things like "you're not your mind," and that phrase can mean different things. Literally, you're not only not your mind, you're not anything that could possibly change. So whoever you are. So if anyone has any kind of definition or implied meaning of who they are, that if you examine it, it's something that can change, then they're definitely wrong. Overall frame of wanting to win overall, where we want to get rid of incorrect ideas, contradictions in our mind, and then help others with the same thing. Things like that, that of course, that the method of gaining clarity, the method of knowing what's true, that's all important. Things like that are not commonly in people's minds, like at all. So obviously, then they don't have their outer frames. Whatever method they're using isn't attracting, getting their outer frames. It's not working, or it's not working if we define working as getting your outer frames. So it must not work from inside out, or else people that are rich and successful and whatever would have their greater frames right, and they don't. So they must be getting lucky in the sense of their outer frame mistakes aren't affecting those particular results that they're touting as successful. In pretty much every case of someone successful, you can find a whole bunch of symptoms of big problems in lives too. I don't want that to be the case. I don't have Schadenfreude about that, right? Where I peacefully or secretly feel good about spotting how someone's really not that well off. Oh, they're rich and they have a beautiful wife or husband, but they don't have this going, some other problem. I'm not saying we should want that at all. Look, I don't want, but in reality, that's typically the case. And even without spotting something like that, we don't need to. We have the kind of ironclad proof, which is they're obviously not saying and living by the clarity about the overall outer frames, like what the real win is, the critical nature of epistemology and understanding clarity and so forth. So the law of attraction is profound, and it makes it easy to, if it's correct, which it is once we finish it, then we constantly know what to do in places where we otherwise wouldn't. How do we get more? So I'll give you two versions. In the Forgetting about my greater frame explanation for a moment, in a simplistic way, if the law of attraction was true and people didn't need any more understanding of it, then they could just think about being more confident and badly want to be more confident. And just then that's all they would have to do. They wouldn't have to get caught up in a bunch of details, or their mind can handle it separately, right? One way or the other, they focus on what they want, put up pictures of people being confident, whatever they might do. And then that'd be awesome. And it actually is awesome. It is that awesome, except that we need to get it right. Once we get it right, we get all the awesomeness of what I just said, all the simple, easy power of that. It is not too good to be true. It is true. But the one thing we have to do to get all this too good to be true stuff is be willing to get the outer foundational frames right. In other words, we need to, if we want to attract confidence, it really is confidence is extremely useful. Once we realize that by default, what people want is to have gray areas, not feel gray, right? People want to feel certain about the good things are going to happen to them, right? That they're going to get results that they want, or they're going to want to feel certain about you, right? If you're buying a product, don't you want to feel certain that it's going to be awesome, right? If you're hiring someone to do a service or paying them as a consultant, obviously you want to feel certain that they're going to do a good job, right? So confidence is attractive. Confidence is what people want. The way to actually get confidence is to have your thinking be such that you are focused on thoughts that truly imply confidence for yourself. And then, in a sense, that's all you have to do. And the rest is going to flow downhill from there. It's going to be easier. At least it's like your semi-soft block. Like you hit that, and then you just have to not be stupid otherwise, like just be competent otherwise in that area. And you'll get it. So all right, I went on here in this slide. I said, for example, thoughts that actually imply a lack of power while seeming to imply power or confidence, such as the intent to struggle or fight, those thoughts attract weakness. Thoughts which imply truly winning attract power. All right. This is where I'm going to bring up again the idea of great practical consequence for both your happiness and success and your feelings of confidence, which are going to lead to all sorts of easier money getting and sales and taking action and everything, right? Like confidence will be a mindset which will flow from getting your implications right of your thoughts. And then from that'll track more good stuff. Is the idea of getting the outer frame right to where you're inevitably going to win, right? I talk about this in different ways consistently because it's so impactful, so helpful and important. Is you need to align your thinking with the idea that you're inevitably going to win. And anything that contradicts that is going to rob you of power and confidence and happiness and all sorts of. The trick is spotting that, getting that straight. So let's talk about that. Telling yourself that you're going to succeed tends to imply that you might not. Just like if a friend says, "Oh, I'm sure you'll succeed." Why do they have to say that in the first place? So that's not very right. Remember, I talked about the source idea last time, right? Anything that is looking. I'm trying to say this. This is so important. People just kind of do this nonsense. Where if we appreciate seeing progress, then that is fun and correct and useful. If we feel happy about progress, we feel pleasure or whatever, a sense of dopamine being released about progress, thirsty person drinking water. I don't know I'll keep going until I explain this right. But then that's a problem. If it's like filling a need where there's a sort of desperation, then, and I talked about this in a different way last time, but it's also central. Like the way that you deal with progress and that it relates to confidence and everything, it's such a thing either in your favor or against you in such a practical way all the time. It's related to the source versus method. You want your confidence to be rooted in distinctions, in clarity that you have. If I'm going to be going into a sales presentation or a webinar, right? If my confidence is rooted in the fact that I have slides, then that, in a kind of simple way, that makes sense because it's like methodological. You might say, wait, are you treating the slides as a source? No, don't get confused between using something as raw material and treating it as a source. Like you don't want to reframe a method into a source. I know we can all get more clarity, including myself, on that to make that better and work on it. But if you're going into a sales presentation and you think, all right, I've worked on clarity. I have a good plan of what I'm going to do if this person says yes. If that's one of the frames that's leading to you feeling confident, that makes sense, right? You see, if you're saying to yourself, well, I'm awesome and I'm just going to be able to figure it out, what you're doing is you're giving yourself there a mixed bag. There are aspects of that can be helpful, but it's like your deficit spending. You're also implying that you don't know, right? Like you don't have clarity, you'll figure it out. And that's why I said here, any intent to struggle or fight, the following will only work if you are somewhat positively disposed towards both of these politicians. I'll just give it as a quick example, because a lot of you might, like, roughly speaking, be. If you look at the language, then nothing I'm saying has to do with any kind of politics right now. I'm just using this as an example of what I'm saying. If you look at the language of John McCain and the language of Trump, John McCain was constantly nonstop talking about how he's going to fight for you. And I believe Palin was too. And Trump would basically, I don't remember one instance of him using language like that. It was always about winning. And if you, as a starting point, are reasonably neutral, whatever, of course, if you just hate them both, then you're not really be able to spot the difference necessarily. But you could try to pick someone on, I can't think of anyone besides Trump that talks about winning is the problem. Possibly Reagan. And there may be some Democrat that talks about winning in our history. I just don't know off the top of my head. So if I could give an example that people could use for that, I would. And there may be, and I want to admit that there may well be one. So I'm not saying there is, not just my own lack of knowledge there. But it'll help you to just see if that's what I like. There's a confidence that it inspires when you talk about winning, and you don't even spot it. Like when someone talks about I'll fight for you, feels in one sense like a positive thing. Like it does have a positive point to it, but it's a mixed bag. So you're robbing yourself of power. You're robbing your confidence of power, right? There's so many things that people do regarding confidence that it's not like the reason that people keep doing them and they look like they work and it's hard to explain why they don't work is because they're helpful to some degree regarding confidence. And that's what's happening with the law of attraction with people overall is their thoughts are a mixed bag of implications. And so they're not really attracting the result that they want. There's, I don't know if it's a conflict or whatever, but there's magnets that are attracting, there's magnets that are repelling, and the overall effect is very weak or non-existent. And the law of attraction fully works. The magnets that are there are magnetizing, but if there's magnets that are counteracting it, then it's not that the law of attraction is not working, right? It's just not being harnessed in an effective way. As you focus on clarity of your thinking and realizing the implications of what you're thinking, then you get the magnets aligned, or you remove the counterproductive magnets that are magnetizing in the wrong direction or repelling, whatever you want to think of it. Then you can purely harness the simple and awesome power of the law of attraction. Doing good will attract good into your life in a number of ways. I can try to back that up and prove it at a different time, but I'm nearing the end of what I should end my monologue here. But I don't want to open up too much of another can of worms. But I don't think the reason I'm not is because I don't think the practical value of proving the law of attraction is all that critical for people. There's a way that we intuitively feel that, okay, yeah, where good lead to good, or obviously thoughts that imply confidence will lead to have more confidence. And then that'll lead to more good. Obviously, our thoughts are involved in our help, right? And when you do a logical progression, our thoughts are in the chain of causality or chain of reasons to why we do actions, right? Like thoughts would come before actions, probably generally speaking. And then your actions are more directly play a part of results too. But since the thoughts come before that, then you can boil it down to your thoughts, right? But then what I've figured out is that there's an overall frame relating to method versus source and related to winning versus fighting, that frame that then trickles down to where thoughts about confidence naturally happen without really trying. And thoughts that would strip you of confidence don't. And I spot all the time how people do things that imply that because confidence is one example of something that you can build more of through the law of attraction. But power itself, which is even more direct, right? It's more meta, but then it also means that if you deal with that, if you attract power, then everything will flow from that too, even more. In the beginning of alchemy, I talked about this, where people start with the assumption, their minds start with the assumption of being helpless, because their mind identifies itself as being you or your mind and body, right? You're an infant. You are helpless from that. If you identify with being an infant, if you define that as what an entity is or whatever, then that certainly there's a lot of helplessness about being an infant, and it doesn't go away when you're an adult. Sorry, there's less helplessness, but you're still plenty helpless, right? And that our whole belief system about the world and a way of operating in the world and what's important and what matters, and it all flows from, it's all rooted in this initial experience of being totally helpless. And everything is a defense mechanism against that, which includes, as I said, a defense against the defense, because it's like with the blind spot, not only does your mind fill in the blind spot, but it doesn't tell you there's a blind spot. So your mind defends against you being helpless, but it does it in ways that are deficit spending, right? And it hides the fact that it's defending against being helpless. So people don't realize that their whole belief system is a defense based on the assumption of helplessness. It doesn't defend you against helplessness by making you powerful. It defends you against helplessness, because the helplessness is rooted in not knowing. So what does your mind do? It creates a whole edifice that makes you feel like you stuff that you don't. So it doesn't give you actual knowledge. It gives you the illusion of knowing instead of actual knowledge. Similarly, it gives you the illusion of power, right? Most poignantly, or quite poignantly, by viewing yourself as a source, right? Oh, I did this, wanting credit, especially in your own mind, for being the reason for your success. and so forth because you're so awesome, right? So it maintains this illusion of power instead of real power, which keeps you helpless because everything's built on the assumption you're actually helpless and therefore need to be fooled into thinking that you're powerful. And everything's circularly based on that, including people's attempts at feeling confident. It's all a house of cards. So there's this kind of deep rooted fear that people are trying to protect themselves from realizing, which keeps them from everything we're talking about in law of implication. Because whenever they start to philosophize or think deeply, the first thing they do is encounter this wall that's scary as heck. Because you have to go through the illusion, not the illusion, you have to go through an illusionary wall. You have to confront a truth, which is that you don't know in order to get to things you do. In order to know that God exists, you have to be willing to open the question up. In order to be willing, in order to know the answer or the multifaceted answer to how to know what's true, you have to be willing to open up that question, which involves admitting that you, for starters, you don't know how to know what's true yet. That is deathly scary for people. It's not even scary. It's beyond scary. It's fully off limit, right? For the mind by itself or for the brain by default. She needs something more powerful and it turns out that consciously you can realize things or set up a frame that is all powerful relating to you and your brain, where it doesn't matter whether your brain has an defense mechanism. When you realize what I'm talking about here, those major concepts, then you can get to that wall, right? And in one sense, everything I'm trying to do with you guys is just to lead you past that illusion where you don't want to open up the question of how to know what's true. Once you're genuinely willing to confront that, then the answer isn't complicated. I've gone through it before. It's ultimately as simple as you don't know something unless you can show how the opposite has to be wrong. All right. So to a little bit bring this to is here and some specifics and what you can do in practice. When you notice yourself with language about you're going to fight or struggle, right? Fighting or struggling implies you might lose. You don't really say I'm going to fight if you're automatically going to win, right? You might say, David, what if I actually might lose? No, because when plan A is you're going to gain clarity until you hit a target that's already revealed itself, then if that is a priority, you will hit it and hit it most efficiently given where you're at now, or what will reveal itself is a slightly or greater, more, but not so slightly different priority. So you'll either gain clarity about what should be a priority, or you'll gain clarity towards hitting your target, and that's just going to work. You can't fail. Logically speaking, there's no failing. And there's no cop out there. There's no deficit spending. It's not overly simplistic. It's just correct. And in practice, I do it nonstop and it works. Right? Either I hit targets, which I do constantly, that reveal themselves. And when I do, I hit like a sledgehammer because of all the implied power that attracts actual power. In practice, I've accumulated so much actual power, like the impact of my thoughts and that action tends to be very strong in where I'm looking at progress, right, with my priorities. Why? It's as simple as a law of attraction, right? What do you really want to attract is basically power, right? Clarity leads to power. And you do that by realizing and not removing a block, right? As soon as you realize it, that's your thought that's going to attract power, right? To realize that something's important or a total priority. And there's no such thing as a priority between clarity and power. One just leads to the other logic, which leads to confidence, right? You don't have to prioritize between them. They're all logically related. They just flow from each other. So my clarity increases. It's not perfect, but regarding hitting particular targets, it's perfect, right? That's how it works, as I said. If I hit a target, that means my clarity regarding hitting it was perfect enough. Anyhow, overall, I gain clarity. I understand the importance of power. So I want that. Then I gain more clarity about what leads to power. But the details of what leads to power, your mind will take care of. That's the complexity. Right? But what are you going to understand about people's minds? What's important to people? Clarity about what's important to them. Is that going to lead to power? Yeah. Is this all going to lead to confidence when you plan things right? Yeah. Is that going to lead to more power? Yeah. It all, but the details get accumulated. That's why I said this, but again, let me remind you why the law of attraction is so awesome is because it's simple. It is as simple as I attract power by having clarity about that's what I want. And I watch out for implications that I don't have power. So if we're getting upset about a setback, does that imply the only reason to get upset about a setback would be if if I was worried about winning overall, right? The trouble with negative emotions, the reason why negative emotions are a problem is you can see this in a new way. I've never said it in quite this way before. Why are negative emotions a problem? Because they're only relevant. They can only come from the initial assumption that you might lose. Picture something, visualize something for a moment. It's going to be fun. Notice how happy you are instantly if you imagine that you're inevitably going to win. And you can, if you're worried about taking action or anything like that, include the idea of priority. So if it's a priority for you to make money, then you're inevitably going to win, which means hitting a target that's relevant for you regarding money, right? Whatever the revealed amount, revealed threshold is for you. And you don't have to reveal it all at once, right? You start by having some sense of it and then you get there and that's sufficient. And there's such a thing as doing that. I've done it. You might say, well, don't you always want more and more? Not necessarily. Not in a priority way. If someone's going to look up to me and hand me a stack of Benjamins, but there's a difference between that and paying, like in terms of priority and research. So again, it should be interesting, right? Emotions imply that you won't win. And the flip side of that is if you imagine that you're inevitably going to win, you can think about a current priority that feels the thing that you care about right now, you want to break through with or deal with. I want you to stop and imagine that you know for sure you're going to hit that as long as it's a priority. You might say, well, what if I accidentally don't make it a priority? How are you going to do that? Only by lack of clarity, right? So if we know overall to focus on clarity, then if something's a priority in a way that it really matters, if you really need money and it's taking up a lot of your mind share and so forth, then you're not going to accidentally just think that it's not a priority, right? Like it's so big and obvious. And then you might say, but what if I also have a young child? Then I might think it's not a priority. Really, no, right? You might have two priorities in a way that they jump out at you where it's hard to control. They feel like vying for control, but you're still not confused about those two versus other stuff, right? And if you go for clarity, then you can keep trying to get a sense of, all right, when does one, you pick one, probably you might pick your child and say, all right, when you remind yourself, wait a second, overall, if I don't know what else to do, right? If I don't know what to do, clearly, if I don't feel, if there's not, I'm eyeballing it. And it's like there's two stacks of M&Ms, one's way higher than the other. I don't know how many there are, but this one's clearly bigger, right? If you're not there with what to do, where you fairly clear what to do, it doesn't mean perfect, you know, exactly every consequence, then you go for clarity. So I think, all right, when does my child need to be a priority? And you can literally take out a notebook and start to write down when they should be a priority. And you don't say that just because you wrote that initial list down doesn't make it right. But that's why, what did I say before also? I said, what I'll try to do is I'll just try to go directly for it. So you try to directly just list out when your child's supposed to be a priority. And by doing that, the starting point for getting like full clarity. What's full clarity? Full practical clarity. By practical clarity, I mean it's enough that the problem, that the target gets hit, that it gets ironed out, right? You don't need to list every possible nuance about when your child's a priority, but you need to get to clarity enough where practically speaking, you can eyeball and you're pretty clear. All right, now is the time when my child's a priority and otherwise making money is a priority. And there's a third thing, like your overall personal relationships, like with your wife or husband or other children you have or family or friends or whatever, then you just try to get clarity on when certain things are priority, right? I've covered this before where You don't have to have something be an overall blanket 100% priority in your life, like money, or a child, or a husband or wife, or whatever, health, right? Each has their time and their place. And if you feel like in practice that's not clear, then you just try to go after it directly and write down when you think um, the different things should be an absolute priority. Like, what are the signals or boundaries or circumstances? And by starting to write it down, you'll set off a process of gaining clarity on that until you have enough that it works. So we're back to winning. That is all in the context of talking about winning and implying winning versus not. And that there is such a thing as a plan that's always going to succeed. And it's not a cop out. It's not overly simplified. It's correctly simplified, right? Which has to do with the understanding line or increasing clarity until you win, and taking direct action, planning, all of it. It all leads to clarity. But if you're not taking enough, starting to look at it and eyeball it, and you're suspicious of how much direct action you're taking, or if you're suspicious you're not learning enough, then just look and see if you feel clarity on the benefits to learning. Stop and imagine what it would be like if you learned a bit more, if you watched a few more Greg's webinars or my webinar, right? It's the avoidance comes from you're avoiding dealing with a lack of clarity. That's where it's coming from. And it shows up in something else, right? Like it shows up in the thing that comes, a lack of clarity about, sorry. Yeah, yeah. A lack of clarity about how you're going to fulfill after a client says yes will result in you sabotaging yourself during the meeting and not really quite wanting them to say yes. A lack of clarity about the sales presentation will tend to result in you not wanting to really put the right amount of effort into getting prospects. A lack of clarity about philosophy is what causes people to not put themselves in a position like where they're alone with their thoughts. Why do people not want to be alone with their thoughts? Because then they start to get into black boxes that they're uncomfortable with. Right? People don't want to confront a lack of clarity, so they intuitively or subconsciously don't do the thing that comes right before that, or the thing that comes to before it. Right? Somewhere in there. That should be pretty eye-opening there too. So watch out for, as your takeaway, watch out for thoughts that imply that you're not inevitably going to win. Also, do the mental exercise of when you notice something that you want, like a target you want to hit, a thing you want to have, something you want someone to do. Imagine how you would feel and think and act if you knew that inevitably it was either going to happen or you're going to realize that it actually wasn't a priority for it to happen, or that the priority was slightly different. Instead of them doing one task, they would do something else that may be related or similar, or sometimes you find out something's totally not a, right. You realize, oh, I just wanted that because my mother was telling me I should do it. But then I realized that was just coming from her, right? What she learned from her mother. So you might realize that something is worth totally dropping. You might tweak it in terms of what the target is and the priority of it, or you'll just accomplish it. You either know what to do, you either eyeball it and it's fairly clear that you should just go try to do something. And what if you screw that up? What if you eyeball, what if you think you know what to do and it looks pretty clear and you go do it and you run into a bottleneck? Then great, you got clarity, right? So even if you eyeball something wrong, you're still going to get clarity. It's all fine. Just try not to like totally die. But the useful thing about that is you're like, all right, it's not going to kill me. Yeah, I'm all right. It'll be okay. And if it is going to kill you, then maybe just don't do it, unless there's particularly compelling data on that scale. So start to look for, and you can write down the question: what types of thoughts or actions or statements imply that I'm not going to win? And start to look for it. And you can start to write it down. Right? Always, you start just trying to do something directly. Why not have said that clearly enough in the past? If all else fails and you're wondering, you're like, all right, I don't know what to do. Therefore, I want clarity. But crap, how do I get clarity? You can meta think about how to get clarity. You like the nature of clarity. But part of the nature of clarity is you just say, let me pick something. Let me try just going directly for what I want, and then see what happens. And that'll lead somewhere. It'll give me some sense of the bottleneck. At least then I might go into a period where I'm asking people about how to deal with whatever I ran into. But I'll have the better questions and understand the answer better if I tried it in most cases. All right. I've been going on for a bit, but I still will refer to what's on the bottom of the slide before I stop. Okay. So what's our reaction to conflict? Now we're still talking about implications of our thought, and it's still related to power, I believe, and confidence. A person let me ask you this. Suppose you were very confident, correctly so. I don't even know if I had to put correctly so on there, but I'm not sure. Suppose you were very confident that you're going to win. Let's suppose you were confident that your 6-year-old boy was going to go to soccer practice that he wanted to go to, or soccer camp, or that he was going to brush his teeth. But he was putting up conflict. So conflict starts that I don't really want to go, or I don't want to go. I definitely don't want to. No, I don't want to. I want to do something else. I want to go to the pool or whatever. But so the conflict starts. All right, picture this. The conflict is currently going on. Your child is fighting you. But now let's suppose this is how we figure out implication. This is one way to figure out implication. Suppose that you were totally confident that he was going to end up going to possibly late, or possibly you already worked this into your schedule that there might be conflict there, but he was going to go. I'm not saying there's such a thing as being totally confident of that, but let's just say you were. Then would the conflict bother you as much as if when the conflict started, you were scared that he wouldn't go, and you'd signed up and you paid money and it was part of your plans. And then you're worried that you're a bad mother. And maybe if you had put your foot down more, or if you're more authoritative or more confident, right? You can probably picture this regardless. If you're a guy, I can picture it, right? Or if you don't have kids, whatever. But this illustrates a lot, doesn't it? You see what I mean about the implication of power and confidence and winning? Now, when I make plans, I don't even set them up to possibly fail. If my wife comes to me, which is real life, right? But should I sign up for soccer camp with Champ? And I said, ask him if he wants to do it, and then ask him again a different day, and when he's in a different mood. And also tell him that. And so what we'll do is my plan involves if he does go and if he doesn't, and I say if he resists, push back a bit, but then if he just absolutely doesn't want to go, then if he does that twice in one season, then we'll drop that season. We're not going to try to go in the future for that season. And also the next season, we're not going to sign him up. Because we asked him, he said he wanted to do it, which means, and we explained that meant committing. We understand that he's not very good at all about projecting how he's going to feel in the future. He's not good at dealing with his impulses and transitioning. And we don't know what it's like to be 6. So I just set things up. So there's no punishment. It's just natural consequence. If he pushes, push back within reason. If he absolutely isn't going to go, don't go. If that happens twice in a season, we stop and we don't do it the next season. And we remind him that we prepared by telling him in advance, telling him that it was a commitment. It means committing to a thing. Here's what's going to happen. We tell him what's going to happen in advance. And then we stick to that. It's all of the punishment, so to speak, the stuff that we're going to do, not to him, just what we're not going to do or not do. We're not doing something extra to him. And then that's that. And that can't fit. It pretty much deals with every aspect. And that's how I make plans. Right? And all my plans are just that same type of algorithm where binary, and here's what we do in this case, here's what we do in that case. And all throughout, we get clarity and we help him gain clarity. We help him see his own thoughts and how he deals with his own mind and so forth to some degree, right? And how he thought he wanted to do something he didn't, or he thought he did and he didn't, right? So first we did the mental exercise of what if you were just confident, just in a vacuum, that he would go or that he would brush his teeth. Brushing teeth is a good example of it. Just has to happen. So what if you're just going to push until he does? Right? That's in actuality what happened. For 2 years straight, he resisted and then did it. And every night. This is and it's not our parenting style. It's just his original personality. But 2 years, and every night he would actually do it and he would still resist. In that case, there's still a confidence. You can imagine being confident it's going to happen. And then you reach a point where you don't get upset about the resisting, really, because you know that you see how you deal with conflict. The moral of this whole story, I'm taking a look into with different kind of examples of details or triangulating in with one example of if you're really confident, truly, then conflict doesn't affect you in the same way. And you don't even need to be impatient to end it. You're not in a rush to end it. Remember, I talked about you can do something fast and it might not be reliable, the result, and it might not be easy. So fast means unreliable and difficult. If you want to guarantee fast, you might also get fast luckily, just like you might luckily get the result if you do something fast, you might luckily get the result you want, and it might be easy, but that's luck. You basically have to pick between you do it fast for sure, and you're not sure about how easy and reliable the result is, or you can get both easy and reliable if you have patience, if you don't need it to happen fast. And he talks about this in a useful way, in an insightful way in psychopictography that I talked about last time. But he doesn't say everything I'm saying here, but he talks about how next time there's conflict or you're not sure what to do, have the courage to just be, as one of your options, to do nothing, to not resolve it. But why does that work? When we understand the law of implication, the implications of our thought, the law of attraction, the implications of our thought and implications, then it implies confident and ultimate power. I don't mean absolute power, but ultimate, but power, kind of meta power. If you're patient about conflict, if in your romantic relationship there's conflict, a moment of conflict, I don't mean like nonstop, incessant, but there's a moment of conflict. If you're confident in your overall relationship, then are you impatient? Do you have to get out of conflict right away? Is it to just, do you have to either be submissive or passive aggressive or get in a panic? No. So if you are patient in the face of conflict, that implies confidence, which attracts confidence by my greater frame of the law of implication. When you imply confidence and imply power, you attract more confidence and more power, which is an upward virtuous cycle. And it's a very major practical part of my method in life, is to do just these various things, like I'm mentioning here, the various examples of where I imply winning, partly by designing a plan that can't fail, right? As I talked about. But I do, that's probably the biggest thing. But then patience in the face of conflict. But it's also a consequence if you design a plan that can't fail or have an understanding of relationships in a way that they're not going to fail. Then you have actual confidence. So it's easy to do things that are based on being confident because you already feel confident, right? But results come from a succession of frames. So being aware of the succession of frames helps you to notice these things, to intervene in different frames directly and so forth. So if you just allow yourself to be patient in the face of conflict, then that will give you more confidence, which will make you more attractive in your relationship anyway. And it'll attract solutions over time, right? If you need to find the first solution that you grab for in a panic, it's probably not going to be an effective resolution of the conflict compared to if you're patient, right? So that creates a whole virtuous cycle there in relationships. Then you can apply that to business relationships. You can apply it to a sales presentation. What if they object? Do you have to feel impatient, have to overcome this objection right away? Maybe it's appropriate to acknowledge their and say, yeah, with me, you don't get, that's not a service I can provide, right? Maybe you just embrace their objection, or maybe you're just patient and say, maybe you don't have a great answer to it right then. And you say, I don't have a great answer to that objection right now. And we'll see if it resolves itself as we continue. Now, what else is going to happen is you'll figure out maybe a better answer to the objection later. But if you don't have a good answer in the moment, then it projects and attracts confidence to just say that. You might make the sale right there because that's such a confidence power play that it might just win the day. And it might not, but it might. You'll hear me say it. Sometimes I don't know the answer to something. I'll say I don't know the answer. And there's ironically, that projects, it's true, first of all, right? And it attracts an answer, right? If you're able to confront not knowing, that's a path along the way to actually figuring it out, right? It leads to curiosity and some confusion even. That's all. If you embrace it confidently, then that's all on the path to success. And you don't really need to get wrapped up in the struggle or the conflict. And there's a nuance here where you can physically, your body and mind can get wrapped up in a conflict, but ultimately you're not wrapped up in it and worried about it. So it's not necessarily effective if your relationship partner or someone you're interacting with in business, if they're worked up, if you're coming across as all calm, you lose rapport. You're so far out of their state that rapport can get broken. You just come across as an ass, right? Oh, because then you can feel like you're superior, which is a separate mistake and you don't have to make it separately, but still they all can be easily related. So you can, even if you don't feel superior, you can come across as superior if you're all, and not getting wrapped up to, oh, I'm not going to get wrapped up in your emotion or something. So in one sense, you can get involved with a conflict at the level that it's on and in rapport with it, and it can actually be helpful. But there's an ultimate sense in which at the same time, consciously you're confident that it'll all go through, it'll all pass. Or, and again, you can picture this with a child. You can interact with a child. They can be like, I don't want to go. And you can be like, look, you can sound a bit exasperated. You can say, every time you go, you're going to enjoy yourself. And it's just, you don't enjoy, do you enjoy fighting right now? Do you enjoy resisting constantly? Let me help you transition here, give you out, let me pick you up. Let me do that. Or do what, might break their state, help them transition differently. But you can get into it. You can be like, look, you can respond, but you don't. And but when you have a certain meta awareness, there are different ways to de-escalate. You can actually, with certain people, depending on their personalities and their associations, if you come over the top of their emotion, if you actually get angrier than them, appear angrier than them, that actually calms them down. It's certain personality types. And I don't personality type people. I don't mean it's a personality type like a Myers-Briggs. I mean that particular aspect. It's an aspect of some people's personality. And also it might depend on their mood. And sometimes you don't know in advance. You just try it. And then you can try coming, but you go by feel, right? You're always eyeballing things. But it can be counterintuitive for a lot of us. It's sometimes counterintuitive for me. But if you come over the top where you get more emotional than them, sometimes that calms it down. Because the other reason to guess that is if ultimately they feel that they're worried that you don't feel like something's important. And this happens with a child, or that you don't understand, but it can happen with adults too. And I don't mean that they're being childish. So what's happening. Then it's really, they want you to feel like it matters. They want to feel understood. So if you really get emotional, then they feel like you understand. Right. And then they come right down. Other times it can be helpful to get angry, but a little less angry. And then you're keeping rapport by having your emotions up, but leading them to calm it down a little bit. And that would happen in other circumstances. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't have necessarily something more insightful to say about that, but just to give you all in all, but an overall patience, however, like a meta patience regarding the conflict, where it's like you get drawn into it, but you also are ultimately patient. You're not in a panic. You're not feeling helpless. You're not implying helpless. I should say. Okay, you can suppose there's an internal conflict that you're facing where you're not sure what to do, or you feel like, darn it, I want to do this, but I also want to do that. I can't do both. Or why am I feeling angry or frustrated about this thing, this task I'm trying to do constantly? So there's an internal conflict. Patience implies that you're powerful. It implies that you're confident. It implies that you're going to solve it. That's good. But then you can think, what if I'm so patient that I don't solve the conflict? You can solve any sort of issue of like a rush or timeliness via priority rather than via like deadlines or like chronological time or impatience. So if you want to make sure that it doesn't get put off in a way that's unhelpful, you can be patient, but feel like it's a priority. You see how those can go hand in hand? And that further feeds your confidence, competence. It feeds your implication of power and so forth. It implies you have the power to choose your priority. That's power. Great. It allows you to be patient. It gives you a way to be patient, right? Logically, without being, while alleviating the worry of putting it off too much, where you did never solve. So that gives you some more thoughts about that. So overall, we talked about power today. I talked a bit about cause and effect and the mistakes of it, and how overall we want to see that the reasons for result in the real world and reality is a succession of frames. They work like attraction outside in. There's some way in which they don't work from the inside out. Like they don't work at the, like acting confident doesn't lead to proper frames of power and proper frames of confidence and so forth. If you just act it, try to do it inside without getting the outside right. There's that's still somewhat of a vague between yourself, like from me and probably for you too, where there's some ways in which how you act on the surface and what pictures you put around adjust your focus, which can have kind of a trickle up effect for things, for frames. But to work on clarifying it. But overall, the reasons for things tend to be oversimplified by our brain. And then our brain feels clever for going up a notch where, oh no, it's not just one reason. It's not just the guy who scored the most points. It's also the guy that got the most assists, right? That's like multiple ingredients. But really there's a succession of frames. Could be that the other team had an injury to their star player was one of the reasons, right? So the more you want to look for all the ingredients, then you can duplicate or either you can or add the parts that are missing in the future. This comes up all the time with conversion and sales, right? Either conversion on an overall scale with marketing, like on a website and a promotion or a sales presentation. The more you are looking for more, understand more frames and reasons rather than trying to just simplify things. And people tend to gain clarity up to a point and then things fit. They're like, okay, that explains it. And then after that point, it's like a U-shaped curve with clarity where then they don't want clarity anymore because now it fits and clarity can only, if you just want things to fit, feel, yeah, that's why I made this sale. This reason, that reason, and this reason. That's it. Then you don't want to think anymore because it can only undo the fitting at that point. More clarity, if fitting is the goal, which it shouldn't. Then, and the reason it shouldn't be is exactly, it's fitting causes you to want clarity. This is where people think, oh, I want clarity. No, you want clarity up to the top of the U shape. Then it fit. You see it, you put it, it gets in focus just enough to where you can fit it in. And then you no longer, at that point, want clarity because it can only make it not fit anymore. Right? I plan to expand on that, the thing about the fitting and the U-shaped curve. All right, not gonna have too much time for discussion this time, but great. Let's take a quick look here. Right, and the overall takeaway is gain clarity and therefore gain in practice. You want to do more things that imply confidence and power and do less things that imply or ideally eliminate thoughts and actions that imply that you are disempowered or that you might lose. And it's never necessary to lose, right? Once you see the overall scheme of gaining clarity until you either win or have a different priority, then then that dissolves that dissolves the real possibility of losing. And why does that matter? Because if there's a real possibility of failure, then denying such would be denying like reality. It could be dangerous or a problem, right? You can certainly acknowledge that you might not hit the target on the first try or on any particular try. That's reasonable. There's things that are outside of your control, and recognizing that is not, it goes, it's good. Actually helps your feeling of confidence comes from focusing on what you know. It doesn't come from believing you're omniscient, all knowing. Think about it, right? You're confident because there's some things that you've built that you might know. You're powerful because you have some ability to intervene in the succession of frames that leads to a result, not because you're all powerful. So recognizing where you can't affect things directly actually increases your confidence in feeling it if done correctly. Because you're being comfortable with not controlling everything implies that you don't need to control everything in order to be okay, in order to win. See? So being comfortable with not knowing something implies confidence in that you can build on what you do know and succeed now. Right? It's very important. I love the parenting example, says Paul, very helpful and applicable, especially if I've got a 6-year-old boy or girl, Paul. Mine has a 6-year-old boy right now. Just challenge you in different language. No, he more has an idea that people speak one particular language. He understands that some people speak multiple languages, but he doesn't try to speak. If I even try to speak Russian, he just starts laughing and says, Daddy speaking. Haha, boy as well, great. Yeah, you remember his big fight speech. I totally do too. completely unconvincing. When I heard it, I knew he'd already lost. I'll fight for you implies I'll almost certainly lose. Yeah, right. Even if we don't have something to compare it to, then we have this intuitive, right, mixed feeling about it. But good, I'm glad that kind of hit you. I wanted to use that example just because it's poignant for a lot of people that are, especially if you're favorably disposed towards those people at the time, then you can still see the great difference. And also, if you're favorably disposed, you probably feel like there's a difference in the results, right? Like someone that's favorably disposed towards Trump would probably these days feel like the results are pretty awesome too, comparatively. And interesting to see those coupled with the philosophy of winning. There's plenty of meta overall mistakes and frames, of course, that Trump has wrong, but that general focus on a winning goes along with a certain effectiveness, which of course will only resonate with someone that's favorably disposed. So I totally understand that some people just really dislike it. Okay, Lauren, so I tried tackling some of this stuff on my own in my pre-David Mills days, and that feeling of hopelessness swallowed me whole. The rest of my adult life has likely been me desperately trying not to feel like that ever again. Heavy stuff. Great. And especially with my help, you can definitely get through this and get out the other end. I don't mean that you can't do it without my help, but there's a way that practically speaking, you can particularly feel confident. This is a bridge. I don't mean that you need to be attached to me forever, just in the terms of a bridge and a hand up, whatever. But so that I feel you, man. I wrestled with a lot of this in fuzzy ways for a long time. I'm just so glad I'm here and have the right tools to sort these matters out. Just knowing there's something on the other side of that wall is huge. There absolutely is. And think of the things, remember, focus on what you can know. Focus on the things that make clear sense. Um, a couple things about happiness. One is what I said, but I want to make sure it doesn't get lost in the mix, or that you don't have to necessarily listen 5 times in order to have it sink in, although apparently that could really be helpful. There's a way that I'm packing a lot into this. And also, the reason why it's helpful to listen to this over and over again is we just don't get any of it typically from the rest of the memes in life, right? We lack a lot of the references and representations we have to get built in framework. Anyway, just think about you can do this on either a small scale or a grand scale, and you're doing it on both is useful. But whenever you stop and think, how would I feel right now if I knew I was going to win? I know some people say, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? It's a little bit the same. But what I'm pointing out to you is with more context and a frame is that it's even such a thing as inevitably winning, right? But notice not what you would do, but just how happy you'd feel. I talked about this in my way with I realized this when it came to dating and then meeting my wife, who I met over 12 years ago. I met her over 13 years ago and married her over 12 years ago. I realized a way of looking at it that was correct, that correctly helped me see that I was inevitably going to win. All there had to be was some percentage, no matter how small, unless it was like vanishingly small, which of women needed to find me attractive. And then from those, I would look for like basically I would need to find them attractive. And then I would need to be able to reach them ultimately where I could communicate with them and not have them just totally shut off where they wanted to be happy. That was a priority to them in terms of our relationship. It was more important than just shutting off, right? The kind of seeking understanding, like in a way that practically speaking was good enough. So I needed to have chemistry with them where I really was attracted to them. And then I needed to be able to kind of reach them in that when necessary in that way. And then after that once I found that would be the semi-soft block. And I just had to be competent after that, where I was motivated to pay attention and fulfill what was particularly important to them. And early within chemistry was that what was important to them, I was fine with fulfilling. Not that it was too much, going to be too difficult, or I was going to lose motivation or just lose the practical ability to fulfill it while I was trying to make money or other things in life were kind of. But what I realized was as long as there was a percentage of women, it could be 2%, 5%, 10%, half a percent. But the absolute number of such women was going to be enough. If the percentage was something where, let's say it was 5% of women, or even just like relevant in my age category and such, would find me attractive enough to at least start talking to me, then I was no longer trying to talk to them and to figure out whether I could win. See, something that I wanted to mention is like anything where that's related to figuring out whether you're going to win and you wanting, that implies that you aren't certain you're going to win and you might lose, which means you're basically helpless. If you might lose, what does that even mean? Think of it, it means you just can't control whether you win or not, right? Which is helpless. How are you supposed to be confident while being certain that you might ultimately fail? Right? Remember, you can be sure you're going to win Obviously, it's always going to involve letting go of time in a certain way, letting go of having to win that instant. But you make up for that. How do you make up for letting go of time? With priority. That's why priority is so important. It's the only way to let go of time while still having the benefit of things being timed, right? Because you can't let go of time and priority. Then you just let go of the goal altogether. But time is a poor substitute. It's when people don't understand. People don't realize that the priority is the one you can do that, and then you can maintain that. You can't. You're helpless regarding time, but you're not helpless regarding priority. Is another way. As a practical matter, we can get into small nuances, but that is even on the surface, that kind of is very. So watch out for when you're going to notice this. You're going to meander to this probably fairly frequently. Is where you're like, oh, good, this means I'm more likely to win. And as soon as you notice that, you're like, oh, and so stop and get some clarity there. Natural consequences versus behaviors are deeply powerful. Probably some of that terminology and stuff is related to some of the talk about in the past. Now that David talks about it, I see how David's algorithm set the tone, including an OMG, and brought such providence. Yeah, I really use the law of attraction in many ways with OMG, for sure, including being careful about implication. That's the whole secret to the law of attraction. Without the secret, it appears the law of attraction doesn't really work very well, practically speaking. And so people try to believe it works, but then they're constantly seeing it not work really. And then it's a problem. Once you see how to make it work with implication, then you see how it's necessarily true. Like if thoughts, the real implications of thought, like the real consequences of thoughts, are obviously going to act as magnets. Great example about implications and conflict. Good. It's going to help a lot of us, me included, with this idea of being patient in the face of conflict, and how that, of course, that goes along with confidence. If you're really confident, if you're really powerful, and if you're really going to win, then that conflict is no more a problem than any other part of the bridge between where you are and where you get to. Conflict is really just it's just a projection. What's there to see in conflict? And any tasks or actions, journey towards a goal, you can view it all as conflict if you want, right? Or you can be conflicted about any part of the journey or not. James agrees. He says, I'm most comfortable or confident. He agrees with something I was saying about the idea about resolving the clarity of what's fulfillment. And I didn't really realize that in that way until today. That's a new realization of mine, is how, like, I intuitively would often focus on product first, but now I see why. Is it goes in that order in terms of confidence, clarity, and motivation. And otherwise, you put off trying to get customers or get leads for customers. He says, I'm most comfortable or confident in selling anything that I know I can deliver the goods or results that my client or customer needs. And what does knowing mean? It means clarity, right? The more clarity you have, the more you know you can deliver in practical terms. In SEO, we all know they need more customers, and customers come from traffic. There's only two ways to get traffic, paid or organic. So I get the more traffic on their website, and their website converts, right? And then that's going to lead to profits and results. So now it's a matter of using the system as you pointed to. So it's all right. You've connected the dot, which is a big deal. I can drop in a phrase here, which is that if you take it to heart, it might add some pretty important clarity regarding making money. Is to make money, you need to connect all the dots that are, at least like always, you need to get over a threshold to make what's going to make money in a business, but you need to connect whatever dots are necessary. You need to fill in all the black boxes to the extent that they need to be filled in order to actually make money, regardless of what your strengths or weaknesses are, regardless of where your passion is, regardless of what you feel like doing. To make money, you need to connect the dots that need to be connected, period. And what people do instead is they want to convince themselves they're going to win by focusing on things that seem to be piling up various metrics, various widgets, various followers, likes, and so forth. You need enough of the product made. What's the threshold you're trying to get over with? What's the revealed target with a product in business that you're making or dealing or acquiring, and someone might be you're ordering it or paying someone else to perform the service. But whatever it is, what's the threshold? There might be two, right? There's you, practically speaking, for the future, you want to have enough confidence, and for ethics, where you can deliver on what you're promising. And the other but a fair amount of that can involve what you promise rather than what theoretically ideal. Remember, you get a result from multiple frames. And so you don't, and multiple, there's multiple things that contribute to a result. The result of fulfilling on your promise, you can always write a sentence down and start to circle the keywords if you're ever wondering how to about something more deeply or break out of a box. And so if you say, I want to deliver what I promise, and there's the word deliver, but there's also the word promise in it. And so it doesn't just come from making this unbelievable product that you refine for years until you make money. You can also promise less or something more specific or more. And at some point, you need to balance those two and you're getting over a threshold where you're looking for where you can promise something that what people are going to pay for. So there's your threshold that revealed itself for what you promise. You need to promise something that people will pay for, but not more. And then you need to fill that. But then you also need clarity regarding your product enough so that when you're doing your sales presentation, you feel the proper amount of confidence. And then you don't need more than that. You don't need more detail than that or more knowledge, right? So you figure out what you need to promise and what you need to feel confident. And that's how much of your product you need to have ready before you start to fill in your traffic and conversion or your relationships that you're building and your, was my other word for sales or conversion? I'm blanking out for a second. It's something like getting them over the threshold or bridging. Sorry about that. I don't mean to imply that it's not important, but I'm forgetting the word that I use to refer to it. Some things I feel that the terminology sometimes I develop for explaining it to you guys, and sometimes I can forget. The real reason for success being a succession of frames. Yeah, that's the big one in terms of cause and effect. And again, what you want to notice is the distinction between what I'm telling you, such as with cause and effect, and what people imply by their actions and thought. And notice, if you would, over the coming week and such, couple weeks, how often people imply that the reason for something is one source. Right? That's the thing. Method has to do with gaining clarity about the multiple frames. And remember, you don't have to hit every multiple frame, but by being aware of multiple frames, all of which lead to something like a sale, right? Things like your mindset, things like your overall understanding of the world, things like whether you build in your fulfillment in your own mind, things like what's happened to your client recently in terms of what they bought and how rich they feel and all that, like I talked about. The more distinctions you have about those frames, the better able you are to intervene with the bottleneck. Right? That's what getting good at sales for a particular thing and getting good at sales in a meta way are both about, is more distinctions about the succession of frames that are involved in a sale so that you can have then ways to check on those frames when reasonable and intervene at the frames where, again, the bottleneck is and or where you're most able to intervene. Sometimes you have no control, right? It's hard to control how a person feels about what they purchased in the last week. You can try to find it out, or you can ignore it, but realize that's part of why you don't control the sale totally. And it's part of why you don't need to get your confidence from the particular result you got that day, because there's some things you're never going to know and you're never going to control, right? And are part of what makes the sale. And weirdly, that helps you relax, right? By embracing the things realizing that you don't control certain things in life. And sometimes you're not even aware of stuff that you're not aware of. But when you embrace that, it actually relaxing. It can lead you to more confidence instead of less because you're not so tied to the specific results you get. You realize there's just a lot. And you're also not intimidated by other people and the results they get. Part of why Zuckerberg is a billionaire, multi-billionaire, is luck, right? I don't mean that therefore he should be taxed because of it. Therefore he doesn't own what he owns, or that he didn't do a number of things that are praiseworthy and useful to copy, right? I'm not really taking any credit away from it. It's just blatantly true. If it wasn't luck, then he could just tell people specifically what he did and everyone could do it to some degree. There's obviously a whole bunch of things. He'd also have to be omniscient for it not to be luck. which he's obviously not, and neither am I, neither are you. There's obviously a whole bunch of factors outside of his control in terms of the success that he had. Lawrence says, does it ever become overwhelming trying to implement all the frames relevant to a goal? Not at all, because I'm not trying. This isn't when I talk about cause and effect. I remember it's really, it simplifies things. I'm glad you asked this question. It simplifies things. It doesn't complicate. It allows me to, over time, gain more clarity about questions. Like when I become aware of a potential frame, such as with sales, that might be relevant, then that doesn't really overcomplicate things. And by knowing that there's a bunch of frames, I don't know what a lot of them are, then I also start with the frames that I have some sense about, right? Like purely realizing that a lot is outside your control, again, it removes complication in a certain way. There's a counterproductiveness to thinking, all right, whether I make the sale is totally up to me based on how awesome I am, basically, right? And if I'm confident, if I have, and maybe how awesome my sales presentation is and all that, by saying there's a number of things about a sale that are going to be out of my control. And then first I'll start trying to understand the things I already realized, right? How to be more confident. And so then I try to go do it. And then as I do, it'll help me to open my eyes to some other things. But a framework also builds in successively. If I start learning a new video game that's complicated, then at first there's a whole lot of stuff I don't understand. Or if I start learning SEO, it's complicated. Then what I know is that learning takes place in a succession of frames another way where I'm not going to learn it all at once. I'm going to hear a bunch of details and a certain amount is going to get absorbed into my mind as a framework. That new framework is going to allow me and my mind to then both make sense out of and remember and assimilate more detail. And it's going to happen in layers. And once I know it's going to happen in layers, then I just set up, like, it's not in my control that it's going to happen in layers. But by recognizing that that's the case, whatever I do control with the overall context, I try to just embrace that and have my overall attitude and strategy and approach embrace the fact it's going to happen in layers. So it's not overwhelming because of the layering. Mainly, I would say the layering idea is what keeps life from being overwhelming. You can only really have one priority at once, or metaphorically different, but in parallel is learning can only happen frame by frame, like layer by layer, layer of framework by layer of framework. And so I don't get overwhelmed because I embrace that. Got it. Awesome. This lesson changes the game. Thank you, Dana. Great. I'm glad, Jennifer. I appreciate that very much. I'm going to have to pull a mic along and binge this series over the next few weeks. That's awesome, Lawrence. I'm glad that it impacted you that way. Julie said, I spent the last week realizing just how source-centric I am, as implied on a practical level. Great. That's terrific, right? Because you probably don't have all that many bottlenecks, right? You've been following me. You've been enthusiastically doing stuff. I know you've gotten a lot of stuff from things you've said over the years, Julie. And so really this source thing is really close to the heart of removing some of the real blocks, the last blocks to getting some more benefits and so forth. And I'll try to add more clarity to the whole idea. What I talked about today, in a sense, it's very related to the source versus method thing, but I'll keep trying to approach as I'm building out this capstone, kind of the central to law of implication here. It should all work together where it'll add to its. I think I have at least one thought just to further the source versus method thing. Oh, the succession of frames. When I talked about cause and it relates to the source versus method in the following way. When a source type based thinking is when you're trying to, that glory hound or that recipe, or even that thinking that the source is to realize something like a little bit meta, like a little bit higher peak, but then you're stuck on that peak. I'll try to give an example, like with dieting, like with health and fitness and dieting, if someone's, no, it's not about this, it's really about this, right? Whatever that might be, right? Like it's not about limiting calories, it's about limiting simple carbohydrates. Then that's the mistake of going kind of one frame greater or shifting boxes sideways or something and feeling like now I've got it. This is the key. This is everything. Now it might actually, one frame shift or frame substitution or frame improvement might be the key in the sense of a threshold, right? Making a sale or losing weight or getting in better shape, whatever, there might only be in practice one frame that you need to change. one factor that you need to change, one reason that you need to then, or either you need to change or just change it by luck or happenstance, or you absorb it or you hear it from someone else. That one way or another get changed, and that might cause you to get over the threshold where you actually reach your target, where you actually lose weight. So that might be the case. However, we don't have to confuse that with source-based thinking. Source-based thinking is where you attribute where you go to the next person and you say, this is the key, this is it, this is in other words, the source of what's gonna make everything work for you. And that's often what diets do in practice. They're like, this is what works. This is the thing. This is the recipe, or this is the paradigm shift. And that's why paradigm shifts in practice sometimes work and sometimes don't. Is a paradigm shift is like number 3 on my cause and effect slide. A larger box, higher peak, or even a sideways box. That's a paradigm shift. If we get to the foundational paradigm, then yeah, that then is going to have a trickle down effect ultimately, and we're gonna succeed. If you get the foundational frame right, including in life, like if you just are going for the overall win in life, if you just understand about clarity, the basic idea of the law of application, then that will continue to work for you and accumulate all the rest over time. If it's also a priority, right? But really understanding it means understanding that it's a priority. So I hardly have to even say if it's a priority. In my other terminology, that's a semi-soft lock. And the rest of this is being competent in the sense, just getting on webinars, me working on this, talking to you, you listening, you working on it yourself without me. That's all competent that goes along with the semi-soft lock of getting the basic idea of the law of application. The basic idea of the law of application, the overall outer frame, foundational frame, right, makes it inevitable that you're actually going to win. You're going to keep making virtuous cycle of progress and get there. You either get there or get annihilated on outside of your control, which I don't think happens logically speaking. It's one or the other. But as long as you're there, as long as there's a you that's there, then you will win inevitably. Okay, great. Yeah, I was just pointing out that about the paradigm shift. What you need to do is get the foundational paradigm. That means you're set. But the semi-soft log, it means you're set along with competence, which means you're working on this stuff. I was talking about source versus method, and I was saying that talking about how cause and effect, how what I talked about with cause and effect relates to the source or method thinking. Method involved method when it comes to cause and effect, as opposed to source, means when you see it as a succession of frames, like I said, that's methodological. And then the source becomes, in a good way, is like the method of getting clarity about frames, looking to where you can, that which helps you to intervene better with the frames that are bottleneck, intervene with reasons need to be put in to get the result. So anyway, that further sheds light on method versus source. Dave Q says, I'll bring this up in a minute or so. Would you agree or disagree that it's not that you're going to win every round? You're going to win the game because you've already accurately stacked the framework? Yes, that's correct. And therefore, I don't even actually, this is perhaps splitting hairs, but it contains a point. And my point is never to be the word police. So if I use a word-based nuance, it's just more about something different, like representing things maybe perhaps in a more useful way. I don't even use the word win when it comes to hitting a certain result with a particular poke or attempt or whatever. Well, I might say it's not that I'm not going to win, I would say, on every round. Like I'm inevitably going to hit the win. So I don't look at it as I didn't win that round. I did win the round in the sense of I'm always coming out ahead regarding clarity. I didn't fail, but I certainly didn't hit my target yet or get fully to the result yet. So I just think of it that way. And it's, for me, I'm more talking about how I look at it. I'm not talking about talking differently. You can certainly say whatever words work for you, as long as you're representing it in that way in your mind. Lawrence says light bulb. That's why eliminating failure conditions until you win work. It's tackling individual frames that are working against you. Awesome. Excellent. That's totally right. Beautiful. I love wrapping it around to the Ragnarok concept. What a great way to end the webinar. You can still gain more clarity than that. Then don't necessarily stop just when this feels like it fits. I would say this is totally correct, but you can still perhaps gain even more nuance and clarity about it. Not based on what you said. I mean, I can. So probably you can too. So look at this. Think about it. Take it to the extremes. Look at things that are close to it, but not quite. Look at it from different perspectives, and you'll gain more insight by looking at this. Remember, don't fall for the U-shaped curve where you get that feeling of understanding, feeling like it clicks and fits. that could be a launching point for more clarity rather than a time to stop with the clarity and just feel satisfied like you have enough clarity just because it fits. Amazing webinar. Thank you, says Julie. Wonderful. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, I'll end it here. Wonderful. Thank you guys. Again, great participation. I apologize if I skipped over anyone's comment in the middle. I don't think I did that too much, but thank you again so much for your attendance and participation. And wishing you the best, Megan, with recovering from the appendicitis operation. You're very welcome, Rohit and John and Fletch and Matt and Aaron and Brian and the people that are still typing, but I won't belabor the recording file. And you are very welcome, Jake. Take care, everybody. Appreciate you all very much. And I'll probably see you in 2 weeks. You're very welcome, Bill.